The Cold War.
Oh, so cold. So very, very cold.
An uneasy peace. We're going to discuss some of the concepts from Module 29, Lesson 1 here, which you hopefully have already read about. Part 1, the beginning of the Cold War. First, let's talk about what exactly is a Cold War.
Hey, good question.
It is a struggle over political differences minus the military part of war. Instead, these countries spied on each other, they made threats, they used propaganda, as we've seen, against each other.
Are we the baddies?
But the Soviet Union and the United States of America are not going to fight any conflict from 1945 to the present day against each other.
Life is good!
This Cold War is going to start almost immediately after World War II ends, and it's going to last for about 50 years. The Berlin blockade is usually seen as one of the events that starts the Cold War, and it made people nervous over Soviet aggression. So let's back up and let's talk about how the Berlin blockade came to happen. After the end of World War II, there are several key
You're saying it weird.
meetings. The first occurs in Yalta, and it's a meeting between the leaders of Great Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union. At this point in time, it is Winston Churchill, Franklin Roosevelt, and Joseph Stalin. Churchill and Roosevelt had been strong, popular leaders throughout World War II. At the Yalta Conference, Roosevelt and Churchill were able to get Stalin to promise a few things. Stalin pledged to support the formation of a United Nations. In return, the Allies agreed to divide Germany up after World War II. Stalin wanted recognition of its dominance in Eastern European countries they had liberated from the Nazis. These countries included Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Austria, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia. The United States and Great Britain agreed to this Soviet influence, but in return, free elections were supposed to be held at the end of World War II. So the right to self-determination was still supposed to be upheld. What happens is, after World War II, the Soviet Union aggressively installs communist governments in Eastern Europe, and these governments really fail to hold elections, which is going to be one of the first steps to mistrust developing between the two sides. Now, there's another important meeting. This is Potsdam.
Dance! Everybody dance! Yeah!
And again, you've got the leaders of Great Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union. But what you probably notice is that Churchill and Roosevelt are no longer in the picture. Instead, Joseph Stalin is the only leader who was at both Yalta and Potsdam still in charge. Germany is to be completely disarmed and war industries are to be dismantled. This is a really important point for the Soviet Union. The four occupying nations could take reparations from its zone. So each country was allowed to basically determine what they were going to take back from Germany for starting World War II. The Soviet Union was going to have control over the eastern part of Germany. Within that Eastern German region was the capital city of Berlin, and that capital city was also going to be divided into 4 zones. The Soviets would get control of East Berlin, which would be almost half of the city, while the French, British, and Americans would be given 3 sections of what would become West Berlin. Right away, even before World War II ends, both the United States and the Soviet Union have competing goals. So you have the United States and you have the Soviet Union. The United States' goal is to encourage democracy. World War II was seen as a fight for democracy, as they were defeating the fascist governments in Germany. The Soviet Union saw an opportunity to encourage communism. The United States is looking for markets, is looking for raw materials. The Soviet Union is looking to be able to rebuild its own economy after being destroyed in World War II. The United States wanted to rebuild European governments so that the US could sell goods to Europe again, whereas the Soviet Union wanted to control Eastern Europe to create a buffer zone to protect it from an antagonistic West. The United States sought to rebuild and reunite Germany, whereas the Soviet Union wanted to keep Germany divided after having been invaded by the country twice in a 20-year period. So after the war's end, you've got Berlin here divided into two chunks here, and you can see the West Berlin divided between the three allies, the French, British, and Americans. You can also see the four zones here. The French would get the smallest out here, with the United States and British controlling the other parts. All three would become the unified nation of West Germany. So, as talked about, these territories here, Stalin suppressed those countries. They
Help! Help! I'm being repressed!
Forced loyalty through phony trials and executions. He kept troops in Iran after the war, and after the United States and British withdrew their troops from the region. In February of 1948, the Communist Party in Czechoslovakia seized control of that government, and you're going to see the development of an Eastern Bloc of communist countries under the direct control of Moscow and Stalin in the Soviet Union. Two treaties are going to form, NATO and the Warsaw Pact. NATO is going to be formed first, and it's going to be led by most of the allies except for the Soviet Union, led by the United States. It stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Its purpose was a defensive military alliance. The idea was that if anyone attacked one nation within NATO, that all of the other countries would then attack the aggressor nation. So the idea, again, was a defensive alliance. But Stalin saw this as a threat, I think rightfully so in some ways. So the Warsaw Pact is formed in opposition to that. It's led by the Soviet Union. As I mentioned, it's a response to NATO forming. This too is a defensive military alliance with the express idea that countries that would be attacked would be protected by all the members of the Warsaw Pact. The Warsaw Pact is also going to see the building of the Berlin Wall in the 1960s, one of the most visible symbols of the Cold War. It included most Eastern European countries, but one important country that was not part of either NATO or the Warsaw Pact was China. China is going to become a communist party after World War II. It is the largest communist country, but it is going to decide to stay neutral because they really had some distrust for the Soviets. So this is a map of what Europe looked like. You can see the Warsaw Pact countries in the eastern part, and you can see the NATO countries in the western part, plus Greece and Turkey in the south, which we'll get to in just a little bit. There are some neutral countries, Yugoslavia, one of the largest neutral countries there.
I have no strong feelings one way or the other.
But most of the world is either aligned with the NATO or with the Warsaw Pact. One of the successes after World War II was the creation of the United Nations. At the time, it was made up of just 50 countries, but it was designed to protect its members from aggression. It's based in New York City, which it's still located to this day. It's made up of leaders of each nation, and this is called the General Assembly. And so in the General Assembly, each country has a voice. But there are groups within it that have more power. One of the most powerful is the Security Council. And on the Security Council, there are 5 permanent members. Those are the United States, China, the Soviet Union, or today Russia, Britain, and France. And any decision of the Security Council can be vetoed by the objection of any one of those 5 countries. So all 5 of those countries have to agree for the United Nations to be able to do anything. Here's a picture of the inside of the General Assembly there. You can see the rather large meeting hall there.
You are my champion.